Ranger wasn't just hurt. He was gone. His body was still alive, but his mind had disappeared into something dark. When the vet tried to touch him, he attacked. When Caleb called his name, the dog didn't even blink. And when they said they might have to put him down, Caleb stopped breathing. Let me take you back to where it all began. My amazing friends and family, welcome back to Jenna's Velvet Tales. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe. Every subscription helps us share more emotional stories about the deep bonds between humans and animals. If this kind of story touches you, your support truly means a lot. Feel free to say where you're watching from, and don't forget to explore more beautiful stories here on the channel. Now back to the story. They carried Ranger into the emergency vet hospital just after midnight. Caleb had held him the whole way in the cruiser. Blood soaked through the towel he wrapped around the dog's back leg. It was deep. Glass maybe, or metal. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Ranger had saved a child's life, and maybe his own. And now he was dying on a cold metal table. One of the vet techs reached for Ranger's collar, gentle, trying to calm him, but Ranger turned his head fast and snapped. His teeth barely missed her hand. Another tech tried to touch his front paw for a pulse. Ranger growled so hard it stopped everyone in the room. His legs kicked. His eyes rolled wide, searching but not seeing. The noise he made wasn't like anything Caleb had heard before. It wasn't pain. It was panic. And it didn't stop. Caleb stood in the corner. He didn't speak. His uniform was torn at the knee, covered in ash. His hand still shook from the crash site. And when he looked down at his arm, he saw fresh bite marks. Ranger had bitten him too. He hadn't meant to, but he had. "He won't let us near him," one of the vets said. Her voice was tight. "We've tried the sedation patch. He's shaking it off. Adrenaline's too high. If we can't calm him down soon, his heart won't make it." "What are you saying?" Caleb asked. He already knew. He just needed someone else to say it. The other vet, an older man with tired eyes, looked straight at him. "We may have to put him down. If the trauma doesn't stop, his body won't survive." Caleb's hands dropped to his sides. His heart slammed against his chest. "No," he said. "No, that's not an option. Officer Ross," the vet said slowly. "He's not the same animal you brought in. That dog is in another world now. He doesn't know us. He doesn't even know you." That was the worst part. Caleb had trained with Ranger for 3 years. He knew every signal, every sound. But right now, Ranger's eyes looked through him, like he wasn't even there. "I can calm him," Caleb said. "Just give me a minute." The vet stepped back. "You've had 10. Caleb stepped to the side of the table. He crouched down, kept his voice low. "Ranger, buddy, it's me. It's just me. You're okay. We're out. You got us out." The dog's body jerked. His legs tensed. His eyes locked on Caleb. And for half a second, just one, Caleb thought he saw something in their recognition. But then Ranger growled again. Louder. Deeper. His lip curled back. Saliva dripped off his teeth. The growl didn't stop. And Caleb felt something tear inside him. He turned his back, stepped away, and wiped his face. He hadn't even realized he was crying. Then the front door opened. And everything changed. She walked in like she wasn't a stranger. Army fatigues, combat boots still dusted with dirt. Her hair pulled tight, her face unreadable. Caleb looked at her, confused. "Ma'am, this area's restricted." She kept walking. "I know." One of the nurses stepped up, blocking her path. "Excuse me, you can't go back there." "I can help him," she said. Calm. Certain. "Help who?" Caleb asked. She pointed. "The dog. Let me in." "You know him?" Caleb asked, stepping in front of her. She didn't answer. She looked over his shoulder at the operating room. Then she said something so soft Caleb almost didn't hear it. "His name's not Ranger." Caleb stared at her. "What?" She stepped closer. "Not before. He had another name. Before they took him from us." The techs looked at each other, uncertain. Ranger was still growling, still fighting. The sedatives were ready, but no one wanted to try again. The older vet whispered, We've got 2 minutes. That's it. Heart's going too fast. The woman looked through the glass. Open the door. Who are you? Caleb asked again. She looked at him. I served with him. In Djibouti. He wasn't a police dog back then. He was something else. Caleb hesitated. But he saw her eyes. They weren't desperate. They weren't scared. They were steady. He opened the door. She walked in slow. No rush. No panic. She crouched beside the table. Ranger's head turned, and everyone in the room flinched. But the woman didn't move. She just whispered one word. Echo. Ranger's ears twitched. The growl stopped. Echo, she said again gently. The dog's eyes blinked. Once, twice. Then his body stopped shaking. A small sound escaped his throat. Not a bark. Not a growl. Just something soft. Something lost. The vets didn't move. No one did. The woman reached up, slowly, and touched the scar behind his right ear. I stitched this, she said. You remember? Ranger leaned forward. His head pressed against her hand. And for the first time since the fire, he looked calm. The older vet cleared his throat. We can place the line now. Sedate him safely. Do it, Caleb said. The woman didn't move. She stayed there, whispering quiet things only Ranger could hear. Caleb stepped close. What's going on? She didn't look at him. He was ours. The unit found him half dead after a raid. No tag. No chip. Nothing. He wouldn't leave the wounded. We kept him. Named him Echo. He saved 3 lives before we lost track of him. Caleb blinked. I don't understand. How did he end up in a shelter? There was an ambush. Records lost. Dogs too. I searched shelters when I got home. Never found him. Until tonight. Caleb looked at Ranger Echo, sleeping now under light sedation. His chest rose and fell slowly. His eyes still half open, staring at the woman who somehow brought him back. You saved him, Caleb said. She looked up. No, he saved me first. The vet room slowly began to feel normal again. The panic was gone, but no one said a word. Everyone kept watching the woman on the floor beside the table, like she was holding something more than a dog, like she was holding the line between life and death. Caleb stood near the door, unsure of what to do now. He didn't want to interrupt, but he also couldn't stop looking. The way Ranger Echo kept his eyes on her was different. There was no fear, no fight, just something soft, something Caleb hadn't seen since before the fire. He finally spoke. What's your name? She didn't look at him right away. Her fingers moved slowly across the dog's head, behind the ears, like she knew every inch of him. Then she said, Joe. He waited for more. She didn't offer it. Joe, he said. How did you know to come here? I didn't, she replied. You didn't? No. I was on my way to a different clinic, dropping off a kitten I've been fostering. Got the addresses mixed up. He frowned. So you just walked in? Joe finally looked at him. I heard the screaming before I opened the door. She stood up slowly. Ranger's eyes followed her, but he didn't growl. He didn't even move. His body stayed still, like hers was the only movement that mattered. You ever hear a soldier scream in their sleep? She asked Caleb. He nodded once. Yeah, that's what it sounded like. Only worse. One of the vets stepped forward, speaking softly now. He's stabilizing. Heart rate's dropping into range. We'll begin cleaning and stitching soon. Joe nodded. He's got a piece of something in his back leg. Might be glass. You'll need to check near the hip. How would you know that? The vet asked, surprised. Joe answered without turning around. I saw how he walked when you carried him in. The vet stared at her for a second, then gave a quiet nod and walked away. Caleb was still watching her closely. His voice was gentler now. How long did you serve with him? Joe took a breath. 7 months. Maybe 8. I lost track after a while. Djibouti, you said? Yes. Caleb shook his head. I've read all of Ranger's files. He came from a shelter upstate. They had no history on him. Joe looked at him. That's not surprising. We were told all the animals were lost after the base went down. Some ended up in military transport crates. Some didn't make it. Some just disappeared. Caleb let out a slow breath. And he just happened to end up here. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew it wasn't random. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. The beeping machines continued in the background. Steady now. Jo walked to the far side of the room and leaned against the wall. Her shoulders were tense, but her hands had finally stopped trembling. Caleb noticed. He saw things like that. He was trained to. But this time he wasn't sure what to say. So he asked the only question that was stuck in his head. What was he like? Before? Jo glanced at him. Before? Yeah, before I knew him. She looked down at her boots, then back at the dog. Her voice dropped. He was stubborn, hated tents, refused to eat near generators, always took the farthest corner, like he wanted to watch everyone. But he was smart, too smart. He knew when someone was in pain. He'd just sit by them. No noise, no begging for food, just there. She paused. He did that with me once, after I lost a kid on the table. We couldn't get the bleeding to stop. I came out shaking, and he was just there, quiet, close, didn't even touch me. Just Saturday. Caleb didn't say anything. He let the silence fill the space between her words. Then she said something he didn't expect. I never really stopped looking for him. The vet called from the other side of the room. Bullet fragment, not glass. Deep, near the muscle. Jo didn't react. That would explain the limp. Caleb raised his eyebrows. You saw that too? She gave a tiny nod. Echo never limped unless something was really wrong. Caleb walked toward the table, slowly. Ranger's breathing was soft now. The sedative was strong, but not too deep. He looked peaceful but not gone. I trained with him every day, Caleb said. I slept next to him in the K9 trailer for a month when he got heatstroke. I thought I knew everything about him. Jo looked at him, not unkindly. You knew Ranger. He looked back at her. I knew Echo. At that moment, Ranger's paw twitched. Not from pain. From recognition. His head tilted, ever so slightly, toward Jo's voice. The vet noticed it, too. He's still tracking her. Even sedated. That's rare. Caleb shook his head slowly. No. That's not rare. Not for him. Jo hadn't sat down. She stood with her arms crossed now, but not defensively. More like someone used to long waits. Someone who didn't mind standing when something important was happening. Her eyes never left Ranger. Even when the vet team began preparing for surgery, even when Caleb moved closer, even when silence stretched. Caleb finally asked the thing that had been sitting heavy in his chest. Why didn't he recognize me? Before you came in. It was like he didn't know me at all. Jo glanced at him. Her voice stayed quiet. It's not that he didn't know you. It's that he couldn't reach you. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? You've seen it in people, haven't you? Soldiers. First responders. Trauma locks you out of your own head. You're alive, but you're not here. You're stuck in the moment that broke you. Caleb nodded slowly. Yeah, I've seen it. She gestured toward Ranger. That's where he was. You weren't the problem. The fire wasn't either. It was the moment he remembered something. Something old. Something buried. That panic? It wasn't about you. It was about where he thought he was. Caleb swallowed hard. Djibouti. Jo gave a small nod. The shelter fire. The screaming. The metal. The blood. It must have triggered it. And your voice brought him back. No, she said. His name did. The vet team worked in rhythm. One cleaned the wound. Another monitored vitals. A third prepared to remove the small bullet fragment lodged deep behind the muscle. One of them looked over. We're beginning. Jo stepped back slightly. Caleb moved beside her. She spoke again, softer now. We called him Echo because he never made a sound. Never barked. Never growled. He just listened. Took it all in. He was quiet, but always there. Caleb nodded. He's like that with the kids we visit. Therapy school visits, trauma center rounds. He just lies next to the bed until they fall asleep. Joe didn't answer, but a small smile passed across her face. It didn't stay long. A monitor beeped softly. The vet glanced at the screen. Heart rates holding. Good rhythm. Another spoke. Fragments deeper than we thought. We'll need another minute. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. He's strong. He'll make it. Joe looked at him again, but this time her eyes were different. Not doubtful, but something else. She spoke low. Strength isn't always what saves them. Sometimes it's connection. Caleb turned to her. Is that what this is? A connection? Joe let out a slow breath. I don't know what it is, but it never left. A few minutes passed. The tension in the room didn't leave, but it settled into something more focused. The lead vet spoke again. Got it. Bullets out. We're starting the close now. The entire room seemed to exhale at once. Caleb took a slow step forward. He stood by Ranger's side, reached out, and placed his hand gently on his fur. Good boy, he whispered. You did it. Ranger didn't move, but his breathing stayed steady. Then Joe stepped beside him. She reached forward, brushed her fingers behind his ear once more. The movement was simple, soft, full of something unspoken. And that's when Ranger made a small sound. It was barely there. A soft, slow exhale. Like relief. After the surgery, they moved him to recovery. Caleb stayed close. Joe didn't leave either. The staff offered her a chair. She didn't take it. She stood with her back against the wall, arms folded again. Watching. It was nearly 3 a.m. when someone finally broke the silence. Caleb looked over. Did you name him? Joe shook her head. No, that was the sergeant. He said the name fit. Said Echo reminded him of the kind of soldier who never spoke unless it mattered. Caleb nodded. Yeah. Sounds about right. They stood there in that soft light for a while. No noise but the hum of machines and Ranger's slow, sleepy breathing. Then Caleb said, You know he's not going back to the shelter, right? He's staying with me. Joe smiled faintly. He already did. Caleb hesitated, then said, Would you ever want to see him again? I mean, after this. Joe didn't look at him. She looked at the dog. If he remembers me tomorrow, she said, I'll stay. Outside, the rain had started. Soft and slow. The kind of rain that fills the silence without making it heavy. Inside, the recovery room stayed warm. Ranger Echo slept deeply. Safe. Calm. His chest rising and falling like waves. And for the first time since the fire, Caleb let himself hope. The rain outside wasn't letting up. The lobby lights had dimmed. The clinic had closed to the public hours ago, but no one told them to leave. Ranger's cage sat near the back wall, lined with fresh blankets. His front leg had a clean foreline taped carefully into place. His body was stitched and bandaged. His eyes were shut, but they flickered now and then like he was dreaming. Joe sat on the floor now, her back against the wall, her knees pulled close. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't watching the clock. She was watching him. Caleb stood nearby, leaning against the corner, his hands in his pockets. He'd taken off his vest and placed it on a chair, but the rest of his uniform was still stained from the call. His radio sat on the windowsill, silent now. Hadn't gone off all night. He looked at her. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. Maybe more. He hesitated, then said quietly, You're not surprised he's still alive? She shook her head. No. Why not? Joe looked at him for a second. Then she turned back toward the cage. He always made it out. When things went bad, we all looked for him. When we couldn't find someone in the wreckage, Echo found them. When people lost hope, Echo stayed. She rested her chin on her arms. One night, we lost comms with a patrol team. 2 soldiers missing. The others were scattered. No radio. No backup. We thought they were gone. She paused. He took off without a word. Just started running. Straight into the dark. No leash. No orders. Just ran. Caleb watched her quietly. The room felt smaller now. Like her words made the walls lean in a little closer. He came back 20 minutes later, she said, covered in dust, blood on his fur, and one of the soldiers limping beside him. Caleb lowered his head, nodding slowly. Joe added, "The other one didn't make it." But Echo never left his side. She let that sit in the room for a while. Then she said, "He wasn't just a dog. You know that, right?" Caleb's voice was soft. "I know." Joe looked over at him again. They assigned him a number, a military tag. But he never cared about that. He cared about who was hurting. That's how he picked people. Caleb crossed his arms. "I didn't pick him. The academy paired us. Said we matched on behavior and response." Joe raised her eyebrows. "You ever think maybe he picked you?" He didn't answer. Ranger stirred. Not much. Just a small twitch of his front paw. Joe sat up straighter. Caleb moved closer to the cage. The dog's eyes blinked slowly, then opened. Joe stood, calm but ready. She didn't say a word. Caleb crouched by the side of the cage, leaning in close. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You're all right. You're safe." Ranger looked at him. For a second, there was nothing. Then something shifted in his face. His ears flicked forward. His nose moved slightly, catching the scent. Caleb smiled. "That's right. It's me. You remember." Ranger's eyes moved again, toward Joe. She didn't step forward. She didn't speak. Then Ranger made a small noise in his throat. Not a growl. Not a bark. Just a sound. Joe stepped a little closer. Caleb looked back at her. "Say it," he whispered. Joe looked down at the dog. "Echo," she said softly. Ranger's ears twitched again. Then he laid his head back down. His body relaxed fully. And in that moment, Caleb saw something he hadn't seen in all the hours since the call. Peace. The vet came in quietly behind them. "Vitals are holding steady," she said. "If things look good by morning, he can be released into monitored home care." Caleb stood up. "He's coming home with me." The vet nodded. "We'll prepare the discharge notes and wound care instructions. Should I bring in the papers now?" Caleb looked at Joe. He hesitated, then said, "Can you stay?" "Just until morning." Joe looked surprised. She blinked. "Why?" He didn't smile. He just said the truth. "Because he's calmer with you here. And because I think I need to know more about the parts of him I've never seen." Joe looked at Ranger, then at the door, then back again. "I'll stay," she said. Caleb exhaled. Just once, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Then I'll stay too." As night dragged on, the rain tapped lightly on the window glass. Two chairs were pulled close to Ranger's cage now. One held a folded blanket. The other held silence. And between the two of them, a dog slept like he finally felt safe again. The hours passed slowly, but no one said a word about the time. It didn't matter. Ranger, no Echo, had fallen into a deep, steady sleep, and both Joe and Caleb sat watching like parents outside a hospital room. The lights in the clinic were dimmed to nighttime levels. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving one overnight tech who checked in quietly every half hour. He didn't ask questions. He saw enough to know this wasn't just another dog on a table. At one point, Joe stood and stretched her legs. She moved quietly across the room to the water cooler, poured a paper cup halfway, and sipped. Caleb watched her, noticing the way she moved. Slow, calm, almost too calm. "You don't get shaken easily," he said softly. She didn't look at him at first. Then she turned around. "You don't either." He shook his head. "I was shaking in that room." She sat down again. That wasn't fear. That was something else. Caleb looked down at his hands. There were dried bloodstains along the edge of one palm. He hadn't noticed before. "I thought I lost him," he said. Joe looked at him quietly. Caleb continued, "It wasn't just the injury. It was the way he looked at me. Like I wasn't there. Like he didn't know me." Joe nodded once. "That's what trauma does. It steals recognition. Makes the safe things feel dangerous." He rubbed his eyes, then asked, "Have you seen that in people? Like that?" Joe looked at the floor, then back at him. "Yeah." I've seen it in the mirror. There was a pause. Caleb didn't press. But then Joe added, when I came home, I'd hear fireworks and drop to the ground. Once I woke up screaming because someone started a lawnmower outside my apartment. For weeks I thought I was fine, but I wasn't. He listened carefully, not just to her words but how she said them. No drama, no performance, just truth. I had a therapist, she said. Didn't go at first. Thought I didn't need it. But then one night I walked past a gas station, and a car backfired. I blacked out. Woke up on the pavement with a scraped face and blood on my hands. Caleb swallowed hard. That sounds terrifying. It was. But it woke me up. That's when I realized I wasn't back. My body came home. My brain was still over there. She looked over at Ranger again. So I know what it's like to be stuck in a moment you can't get out of. Caleb sat forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. He's not just a partner, he said. I know, she replied. I don't know how to explain it. He's the one who keeps me grounded. Like when things go sideways during a call, he's there. When we visit schools, kids run straight to him. He gives people something I don't think I could ever give them on my own. Joe gave a small nod. That's what makes him special. They both fell quiet for a moment. Then Joe asked, what happened tonight? What brought you in? Caleb let out a long breath. House fire. 2 adults trapped. Child screaming on the 2nd floor. We got the adults out, but by the time we got upstairs, the heat was climbing. Floor started cracking. We saw the kid under a table. He paused. His jaw tightened. I told Ranger to stay, but he didn't. He ran straight for her. She was frozen. Couldn't move. He nudged her, barked once. Got her to follow. She made it out. Joe tilted her head slightly. And him. Caleb's voice dropped. He was behind her, but the ceiling came down. A piece of beam landed on his back leg. He tried to crawl, but he was stuck. I ran in, lifted it off, got him free, carried him out. He looked away for a second. He was shaking. Then he passed out. Joe didn't speak right away. Then she said softly, you saved him. Caleb shook his head. He saved all of us. That little girl's family. I saw them at the hospital. Her mom couldn't even speak, just kept crying and hugging her. Ranger did that. Joe looked at him, eyes steady. That's why he remembered. He's only ever responded to people in pain. They sat in silence again. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. At around 5 a.m., Ranger stirred. His legs moved slowly. His nose twitched. Then, without warning, he let out a low whine, soft and drawn out. Caleb jumped to his feet. Joe stood, calmer. The vet tech came in. He's waking up. Caleb leaned close to the cage. Hey, buddy. You're okay. You're all right. I'm here. Ranger blinked slowly. His eyes focused. Then he did something he hadn't done all night. He lifted his head. Just a little. Just enough. Then he looked to the right. Right where Joe stood. She stepped closer. Echo, she said again, gentle, not loud. Ranger let out a soft, hoarse noise. Then, slowly, painfully, he pushed his head forward until it rested against the bars. Right in front of her. Joe crouched down. She didn't say anything more. She just stayed there, with her fingers resting lightly on the side of his muzzle. And for the first time since the chaos began, Caleb knew they weren't going to lose him. The tech opened the cage slowly. No sudden movements. No noise. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't pull back. He just kept his head right where it was, pressed gently against the bars like he was trying to stay close to Joe. She reached in slowly, one hand resting on his head, the other moving down the side of his neck, where his collar had been cut away earlier during the emergency. Her fingers touched the edge of the scar there. It wasn't new. It had healed long ago, buried under fur and years. I stitched this one too, she said softly. Caleb watched her, trying to imagine it. A dusty room, medical bags, blood, noise, and a dog, this same dog, lying still while someone with shaking hands and a steady voice pulled him back from the edge. She looked up at Caleb. He had to be awake for that. We didn't have anesthesia. I held his head with my knee, and I talked to him while I worked. He didn't move. Caleb nodded slowly, eyes locked on Ranger. That's who he is. Joe added, I thought he was gone that day too. Caleb leaned against the edge of the cage. You said he disappeared. Joe nodded. There was chaos. Bombing. Everything shifted. We were told to evacuate. Everyone was scattered. We lost communication. No one could find him. I spent months checking shelters when I came home. He was just gone. She paused. Her voice got quieter. Then tonight, I walked into the wrong building, and I heard that scream. Caleb whispered, maybe it wasn't wrong. She looked at him, really looked at him. Maybe not. Ranger lifted his head slightly and licked Joe's wrist once. Then he looked at Caleb. And for the first time all night, the dog's eyes softened at the sight of him. Caleb crouched slowly, keeping his voice calm. There you are. Ranger's tail didn't wag. He was still too weak, but his ears perked just enough. Joe stepped back, giving Caleb space. Caleb leaned in close. You scared the hell out of me, buddy. Don't do that again. Ranger gave another soft, hoarse whine, like the sound was all he could offer. The tech smiled. That's the best response we've seen yet. Joe stood beside Caleb now. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb asked, what happens now? The vet stepped in with a chart. His vitals are strong. Wounds closed. For fluids helped. We can discharge him under your supervision in a few hours. But he'll need strict rest and follow-ups. Caleb nodded. I'll take care of him. Joe turned toward the door, but didn't walk out. Caleb looked at her. Hey! She stopped. If you hadn't walked in tonight. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Joe nodded once. I know. Then she asked, are you taking time off? Caleb shook his head. No. I need to stay active. The work helps. She understood that too well. You're going to need backup, she said. Caleb gave a faint smile. You offering? Joe tilted her head slightly. He listens to me. You might need that. At least for now. Caleb looked at Ranger, then back at her. We've got space in the truck. Joe smiled just a little. I'll get my things. It wasn't official. There were no orders. No signed papers. Just an understanding between two people who had both lost and found something on the same night. Caleb walked her out to her car. She opened the back door and showed him a small carrier. Inside, a kitten barely old enough to stand blinked at him through the bars. Is that the one? He asked. Joe nodded. His name's Beans. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Beans. She shrugged. He's got attitude. Caleb looked inside. The kitten hissed at him. He laughed. Yeah, I see that. Joe placed the carrier on the passenger seat, then pulled a worn duffel from the back. She slung it over her shoulder. Ready? He asked. Joe looked back at the building. The lights. The cage. The dog that had once been hers. She nodded. Let's go. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the sky was starting to turn a soft gray blue. The kind of light that meant things had survived the night. Caleb opened the back door of the cruiser. Ranger lifted his head slightly from the blanket. His eyes followed them as they approached. Joe climbed in first and sat beside him. Caleb watched her rest a gentle hand on the dog's back, careful of the stitches. He started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the first hint of sunlight touched the edge of the windshield. Joe looked down at Ranger, then out the window. He still remembers, she said. Caleb glanced at her. So do you. The drive to Caleb's place was quiet, but not awkward. Ranger was lying down in the back seat, his head resting on Joe's lap. Her hand stayed on his back the whole ride, moving slightly every few minutes, as if to remind him she was still there. Caleb glanced at them through the mirror more than once. It didn't feel real, not yet. Less than 12 hours ago, he thought he might lose his partner. And now here they were, him, a stranger who wasn't really a stranger, and a dog who wasn't just a dog. His house sat just outside of town, tucked at the end of a narrow street with no sidewalk. There was a tall tree in the front yard, bare from the season. No porch lights, just the kind of quiet that wrapped around everything. Safe, steady. He pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. Joe opened the back door first, whispering something to Ranger before lifting his back legs gently off the seat. Caleb moved fast to help with the front. Together, they carried him inside, slow, careful, like they were carrying something fragile and sacred at the same time. Inside, the house was simple, clean but lived in. A couch, a few shelves, pictures on the wall. Most were work-related. One showed Caleb in uniform, kneeling next to Ranger at a K-9 graduation. Another was a faded photo of two young boys and an older woman on a porch. Joe's eyes glanced at that one, but she didn't ask. Caleb had already cleared a space in the living room, laying out two thick dog beds side by side. He'd set a bowl of water nearby, a soft towel. It wasn't perfect, but it was what he had. They lowered Ranger down. His legs shook a little, but he settled into the bedding without protest. Caleb sat on the floor beside him, leaning back on his hands, just breathing. Joe didn't sit. She walked to the window, looking out through the blinds. Then she turned back. "I'll stay for a few days, just until he's strong again." Caleb nodded. "That'd be good." She asked, "You got coffee?" He smiled. "Always." The kitchen was quiet. She leaned on the counter while he moved around, filling the kettle, opening a cabinet. "Milk or black?" he asked. "Black." He nodded. As the water boiled, Joe looked around. The place was tidy, almost too tidy. "You live alone?" Caleb nodded again. "Yeah." She didn't ask why. He didn't offer. When the coffee was ready, they both carried their mugs back to the living room. Caleb sat on the floor again. Joe leaned against the arm of the couch. Ranger was asleep again, but his ears twitched now and then when Caleb's voice moved. "So," Caleb said, breaking the quiet, "you never thought about readopting him?" Joe blew on her coffee. "I didn't even know he was alive. I thought he died in that mess." She looked down. "I blamed myself for months. I kept thinking, if I'd called him back faster, if I'd double-checked the cages, if I hadn't let him out that night." Caleb shook his head. "You didn't lose him." "Still felt like I did." They sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was shared. Then Caleb asked something different, something softer. "What made you stop searching?" Joe looked up at him. "I didn't." It was almost 8 a.m. when the knock came. Caleb opened the door to find a young officer standing there with a clipboard. "Sorry, sir. Chief sent me to check on you. Heard about what happened at the clinic. Said you hadn't called in." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, it's been a night." The officer glanced over his shoulder. "That the dog?" Caleb stepped out slightly, blocking the view. "Yeah, he's fine now. We've got it under control." The officer nodded awkwardly. "Okay, well, good. Let the chief know when you're back." "Will do." Caleb closed the door gently. When he turned around, Joe was watching him. "You're not ready to tell them." Caleb gave a tired smile. "Tell them what? That I nearly lost my mind because my K-9 didn't know me? That a woman in combat boots walked in and saved him with a word?" Joe smirked slightly. "You could just say he responded to a familiar voice." Caleb shook his head. "That wouldn't be the truth." Joe said, "Then tell them the truth." "I don't even know what the truth is." Joe looked back at the dog. "That's okay. He does." Ranger stirred again. Joe was the first to notice. She leaned forward, setting her coffee down, and knelt beside the dog. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, blinked once, then slowly turned his head toward Caleb. "Hey, big guy," Caleb said, keeping his voice low. "Still with us?" Ranger let out a slow, quiet whine. It wasn't pain. It was more like awareness, like something in him had finally cleared. Joe reached out and gently touched his shoulder, careful of the stitched areas. "He knows where he is now." Caleb nodded. You can see it in his eyes. There was something deeper in Ranger's gaze now. Calmness, like he knew he was home, or at least somewhere close to it. Joe leaned back against the couch. "We'll need to keep the wound clean. No stairs." No running. He's not out of the woods yet. Caleb looked at her. You sound like you've done this before. She gave a small shrug. I had to learn. We had no vet on base. When one of the dogs got hurt, it was up to whoever knew how to hold a needle. Caleb nodded slowly. Did you have more than one? Joe looked out the window for a second, like she was remembering something far away. We had 4. Echo was the youngest, the quietest, the one who never ran when things got loud. She paused, then added, only one came back. Caleb didn't ask which. He didn't have to. Ranger shifted again, pushing his muzzle gently toward her leg. She placed her hand back on his head, her fingers stroking between his ears. I used to hum to him, she said. When he couldn't sleep. When I couldn't sleep. Just something my mom used to sing. He'd lie down next to my bunk and stay there until morning. Caleb smiled slightly. I do that too. Joe looked at him. Not the humming, he clarified. But he always finds my side of the bed. He curls up like a blanket. Joe smiled, for real this time. He always did that, even when it was 110 degrees out. Caleb leaned back against the wall, looking at her. I don't know what this means yet, he said, but I think you should stay. Longer than a few days. Joe raised her eyebrows. You don't even know me. I know he trusts you. Joe nodded, then looked down. Maybe that's enough. Later that afternoon, the vet stopped by the house. She brought antibiotics, new bandages, and a recovery plan. She didn't stay long, just long enough to check Ranger's breathing and adjust the 4-line. He's doing better than expected, she said. But you're going to need to monitor for any signs of fever. If he starts shaking, breathing too fast, or stops eating, call me immediately. Caleb took the instructions and thanked her. Once she left, Joe helped him clean the wound. She didn't flinch at the sight of the stitches. Her hands were steady, movements careful, almost like she'd done this 100 times before. Caleb watched her. The way she moved, the way she talked to Ranger as she worked. Not baby talk, just calm, quiet respect. You've done this more than I have, he said. Joe glanced at him. You're the cop. I'm just the medic. Caleb smiled. Seems like we're both just whatever he needs us to be. That night, Joe didn't leave. She took the guest room down the hall. Caleb laid out fresh towels, a spare shirt, and sweatpants that might be too long for her but were clean and soft. She thanked him without much ceremony. They didn't talk about the past that night. Not hers. Not his. There were things neither of them was ready to say out loud yet. Ranger slept between them, in the open space just outside their doors. Caleb left his door cracked. So did Joe. So Ranger could see both. And in the middle of the night, when the wind picked up outside and a branch knocked against the house, Ranger didn't growl. He just lifted his head, saw the soft light from both rooms, and lay back down, like he finally knew, for sure, he wasn't alone anymore. Morning came quietly. The house was still, except for the soft sound of Joe moving around the kitchen. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. Not strong and burnt like gas station brew, but gentle, fresh. It filled the air like a memory. He hadn't smelled that kind of calm in a while. He stepped out into the hallway and saw Ranger lying where he had been all night, exactly between the 2 bedroom doors. His ears perked when he saw Caleb, then dropped again when he realized there was no reason to move. Just safety. Caleb crouched beside him. Morning, buddy, he said softly. You holding up? Ranger's tail tapped once against the floor. Joe's voice came from the kitchen. He's better. Caleb stood and walked in. Joe handed him a mug without asking how he took it. He sipped. It was perfect. I wasn't sure what you'd have, she said, gesturing toward the fridge. So I made eggs and toast. Hope that's okay. Caleb gave a small smile. You didn't have to do that. Joe sat down at the small table. I didn't want to sit still. They ate quietly for a while. No rush. Just the kind of silence people share when they're comfortable not filling every second. After breakfast, Joe knelt beside Ranger and checked his bandage. The wound looked clean. No swelling. No signs of fever. He's healing, she said. But he'll need walks. Short, gentle, twice a day. Just enough to stretch. Caleb nodded. We can do that. He grabbed a short leash from the hook by the door. Ranger lifted his head. Joe helped ease him to his feet. He was slow, stiff, but he didn't fight, didn't panic. Outside, the sun had fully risen. The light hit the trees in a soft gold. The ground was dry, air-cool. They walked slowly down the sidewalk. Ranger leaned into Caleb's side. Each step was careful. Every few feet, they stopped to let him rest. Joe walked on the other side, not saying much, just keeping pace. Halfway down the block, Ranger stopped in front of a small patch of grass, sniffed the air, then sat. Caleb crouched beside him. Tired. Ranger didn't move. Joe reached into her jacket and pulled out a small strip of jerky. Here, she said, handing it to Caleb. He likes this one. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You kept that in your pocket? Joe smirked. I came prepared. Ranger sniffed the treat, took it gently, and chewed slow. Then he looked at her. Just looked. And for a second, Caleb swore it was like he was watching something settle. Like a thought that had finally finished forming in the dog's head. Joe saw it too. I think he's starting to believe it, she said. Caleb looked at her. Believe what? That he's safe now. Back at the house, Ranger curled up in his usual spot near the couch. Caleb grabbed a notepad from the counter and started jotting down the vet's care instructions. Times for antibiotics, temperature checks, feeding schedule. Joe watched him for a second. You're good at that, she said. At what? Caring for him. Caleb shrugged. It's the least I can do. He's done more for me than anyone. Joe nodded slowly. He's lucky, she said. Caleb looked up. Joe hesitated. I wasn't always in a position to give him what he needed. Caleb sat down across from her. You did what you could. You saved him once. You saved him again. Joe looked down. Yeah, but I wasn't there in between. Caleb's voice was gentle. He doesn't blame you. Joe raised her eyes. Maybe not, but I still remember. There was something in her voice. Not guilt. Something deeper, like the weight of time. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know your whole story, but I know this much. If he chose to remember you over anyone else, that says everything. Joe let that settle. She didn't argue. She just said, thank you. Then they both looked at Ranger. Still asleep. Still healing. Still home. That night it rained again. Not heavy. Just enough to fill the silence with something soft. Caleb sat by the window staring out. Joe sat nearby on the floor beside Ranger, brushing her fingers slowly along his fur. The stitches were holding. The swelling had gone down. But sleep didn't come easy for either of them. He keeps looking for something, she said quietly. Caleb turned. Like what? She didn't answer right away. Maybe it's habit. Or maybe... She trailed off. Then added, maybe he still doesn't know if this is temporary. Caleb rubbed his face. He's not going anywhere. Not again. Joe nodded slowly. You sure about that? Caleb looked straight at her. I'd give up the job if I had to. For him. That surprised her. He saw it in her eyes. I mean it, Caleb said. He's been there for me in ways most people haven't. He deserves someone who shows up. Joe looked at Ranger. You just might be the first person who ever said that out loud. They sat like that a long while. No TV. No radio. Just the rain. Near midnight, Ranger whimpered in his sleep. Low. Restless. Joe reached over, whispered something under her breath, and touched his side. He calmed immediately. Caleb had been watching. You said you used to hum to him, he said. Joe nodded. Yeah. What song? Joe hesitated, then said, it was something simple. My mom made it up. I don't even remember all the words. Sing it, he said quietly. She gave him a look, then looked away. I can't sing. Doesn't matter. She looked down at Ranger, then began to hum. Just a soft string of notes. Not loud, not polished, but honest. Ranger stirred once, then settled deeper. Caleb closed his eyes and let the sound fill the room. When the song faded, there was nothing but the rain again. Caleb whispered, "You ever think maybe he wasn't lost? Maybe he was just waiting to come back when someone remembered who he really was?" Jo looked over at him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then maybe we both were." The rain had stopped the next morning, but the clouds still lingered. It was that kind of sky where the sun tried to come through but didn't quite make it, light without warmth. Inside the house, Ranger stirred from sleep slowly, ears flicking before his eyes opened. He didn't panic this time. He saw Jo first, then Caleb, and he stayed still, calm, like he remembered what had happened, and for once, didn't feel the need to run from it. Jo had taken the guest room for good now. She hadn't said she was staying. She just hadn't left. Her duffel bag sat against the wall, half unzipped, like she wasn't sure if this was a visit or something more. Caleb didn't push. He just made extra coffee in the mornings and asked if she wanted toast. That morning, Ranger let Caleb put the leash on without flinching. They walked slow. Jo walked ahead, just a few steps, her hands in the pockets of her worn army jacket. Ranger's limp was better, but his back leg still dragged slightly if he walked too long. Caleb took note of every step. "I think he's remembering the block now," Jo said as they passed the same old mailbox for the third time that week. "He stopped checking every tree," Caleb replied. Jo smiled. "That's progress." At the end of the street, an older man walked his Labrador the other way. The lab barked once. Ranger didn't respond. Jo noticed. "He's not reacting to other dogs anymore. He used to be hyper-aware," Caleb said. "Every tail wag, every bark, he'd watch it like it might turn into something else." Jo nodded. "That's the soldier in him. Does that ever go away?" Jo didn't answer right away. Then she said, "No, but it softens when it's safe." Back at the house, Jo took over cleaning Ranger's wounds. She was careful, not because she thought she'd hurt him, but because she knew how fast animals remembered pain. Ranger didn't flinch anymore. He let her touch him now without bracing. Caleb watched from the doorway. "You know he listens to you differently," he said. Jo smiled a little. "He listens to pain." "What do you mean?" "He hears what isn't being said. The things people try to hide. The way their voice changes when they're scared. He always knew who needed him most." "You think that's why he came to me?" Caleb asked. Jo met his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe you were the one who stayed." That afternoon, Caleb got a call from dispatch. Not about a case, just checking in. "You think you're ready to come back next week?" the voice on the other end asked. Caleb looked over at Ranger, asleep on the floor, his head resting on Jo's boot. "No," he said. "Not yet." Jo glanced up at him after the call. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. But she knew. On the third day, they took Ranger for a longer walk. The limp was still there, but he moved with more confidence. He stopped to sniff things, watch squirrels run by. The tension in his shoulders had lessened. He still stayed close to Caleb's side, but he didn't look ready to bolt anymore. At the park, a boy no older than 10 sat on a bench with his mom. When he saw Ranger, his face lit up. "Is that him?" the boy asked. "The dog from the fire?" Caleb nodded. "Yeah, this is Ranger." The boy walked slowly toward him. His hands were tight at his sides, like he wasn't sure if it was okay. Jo crouched beside Ranger, whispering something in his ear. Then she looked at the boy. "You can pet him. Just be gentle." The boy knelt down and reached out. Ranger didn't move. The boy's hand touched the fur on his head. Ranger blinked but stayed still. Then, slowly, the boy leaned closer and hugged him. His mom put a hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Caleb looked at Jo. She nodded once. He remembers why he matters. That night, something changed. Jo was quiet, quieter than usual. She sat outside on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the dark. Caleb joined her, handing her a mug. She took it without speaking. "What's on your mind?" he asked. Jo took a sip, then said, "He was the last piece." Caleb waited. I didn't say goodbye. When we were forced to leave that base, I looked for him, but I didn't have time. Orders were orders. The last thing I heard was a soldier yelling that the kennels were hit. Her voice dropped. I thought he died thinking I left him. Caleb said. He didn't. Joe looked at him. How do you know? Caleb nodded toward the house. Because when he heard your voice, he came back. Joe looked down, fighting something she didn't say out loud. Then Caleb asked, What about you? She looked at him. Did you come back? Joe took another sip. I don't know. They sat in silence again. But this time the silence was shared, not lonely. A week passed. Ranger's wounds healed well. The limp remained, but the stitches came out. He began to follow Joe from room to room, like he used to in the old days. Caleb noticed. You think he'd ever want to go back to work? He asked one morning. Joe glanced at the dog. I think he already has a job, just not the one you were thinking of. What job's that? She smiled. Keeping you from falling apart. At night, Joe started humming again. Not every night, just the ones where Ranger twitched in his sleep. When Caleb looked anxious. When the air in the house felt like it was holding something too heavy. She didn't know all the words to the lullaby, but she didn't need them. The sound was enough. By the end of that second week, Caleb submitted a request for reassignment, desk duty, temporary leave from field calls. When the department asked why, he said it was medical. No one pushed. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone knew what Ranger had done. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know the name Echo. They didn't know the woman who whispered it and brought a dog back from somewhere too dark for most people to return from. But Caleb did. And he wasn't letting either of them disappear again. On the last night of that second week, Caleb found Joe outside, staring up at the stars. Thinking about leaving? He asked. Joe didn't answer at first. Then she said, Not yet. Caleb leaned on the porch railing beside her. You're not a visitor anymore, he said. You're part of this house. Joe looked at him, a little surprised. Then she nodded once. I'll stay a little longer. Ranger came out onto the porch a minute later. He didn't run. He didn't limp. He just walked up, sat between them, and rested his head on Joe's foot. Caleb smiled. He remembers you. Joe looked down at the dog, her hand moving to his head. I remember him too. 3 weeks had passed since the fire. Ranger no longer flinched at the sound of the coffee grinder. He no longer whimpered in his sleep. The limp was still there, a quiet reminder of what had happened. But his steps were stronger, his breathing more even, and his eyes clearer. Joe had stayed. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. Her duffel bag was no longer packed. It sat open in the corner of the guest room, half empty, the way closets look in homes where people plan to stay, but haven't quite admitted it yet. Every morning she made coffee. Every afternoon, she walked with Ranger. And every night, she stayed near him until he fell asleep. Caleb never asked how long she was staying, because deep down he hoped she never left. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. Caleb found it tucked under his windshield after grocery shopping. No return address, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper with a short note written in ink. We saw what happened at the clinic. That wasn't just a dog. I think I knew him once. I need to talk to you. MG. He read it 3 times before walking back into the house. Joe was at the sink, rinsing out a mug. She looked over when she saw his face. What is it? Caleb handed her the note. She read it silently, then again. Who's MG? He asked. She shook her head. No idea. He studied her face. Are you sure? Joe handed the note back. It could be anyone, but it's strange, right? He nodded. Very. They didn't talk about the note again that day. But that night, Caleb caught Joe standing by the living room window, staring out like she was waiting for something to appear at the end of the street. The next morning, Ranger was slower. His breathing was off. Joe knelt beside him, her hand on his side, and stayed there a long time. He's tired, she said. Not just physically. Caleb crouched next to her. You think it's the healing catching up? Joe looked at him, serious now. I think Something's pulling at him. That afternoon, another note came. This time, taped to the front door. Djibouti, 3rd Medic Unit. Ask him about the scar above his eye. MG. Joe went pale. Caleb stepped closer. You okay? She stared at the note. Then she whispered, there was a guy in our unit. Quiet, kept to himself. We called him Ghost. His last name was Grant. Marcus Grant. Is that the MG? I thought he was dead. That night they barely spoke. Ranger didn't eat much. Joe stayed near him, humming the old tune under her breath, again and again, until his body finally rested. Caleb watched her from the hallway. The next morning, another note was waiting on the porch swing. Meet me at the field, the old soccer field by the school. Come alone. Joe said nothing. She just looked at Caleb and nodded. I'll go, he said. No, she said. I will. He stepped forward. Joe. She looked at him with steady eyes. This is my past. Let me face it. The field was empty. White, brown grass. One rusted goalpost. Wind moving through the trees nearby. Joe stood alone at the center, hands in her pockets. And then, a man appeared from behind the tree line. Worn boots, jacket with no insignia, a beard he hadn't shaved in days. He walked slowly, like every step still hurt. When he reached her, he stopped 5 feet away. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just looked. I knew it was him, he said. I knew when I saw the video. Joe nodded. You survived. Marcus looked down. Barely. I thought you were dead. They thought I was too. Pause. Then Marcus said, I looked for him. After the blast, I found his paw sticking out from the rubble. I pulled him out. Joe's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. You saved him. No, Marcus said. He saved me. Another pause. I carried him for a mile. My shoulder was shattered. I wrapped him in my jacket and followed the smoke. Joe whispered, I never knew. No one did. They pulled me out 3 days later. Joe stepped closer. Why now? Why leave the notes? I saw you in the video. I had to be sure. They stood there a long while, the wind brushing past, before Marcus finally asked, Can I see him? Joe nodded. He might not remember. Marcus gave a tired smile. Then maybe he'll just feel it. Back at the house, Caleb opened the door when he saw them returning. Joe walked in first, then Marcus. Ranger was lying on his bed, eyes half open. Joe crouched beside him. Hey, buddy. We brought someone. Marcus stepped forward, slowly. Echo, he said, voice trembling. The dog's ears flicked. Marcus crouched down. It's me. Remember the cave? The jacket? The march? Ranger opened his eyes fully now. Then, slowly, he pushed his head forward, pressing it against Marcus's knee. Marcus let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Caleb turned away, letting them have the moment. Joe watched with tears quietly falling down her cheeks. Ranger stayed pressed against Marcus, breathing slow and steady, like something broken had just clicked back into place. That night, Marcus stayed for dinner. He didn't talk much. Neither did Caleb. Joe filled in what needed to be said, but the silence felt good. Safe. After dinner, Marcus looked at Joe. I've been drifting for years. Didn't think I had anything left to return to. Joe nodded. Maybe Echo did. Marcus looked at the dog. He's not the same. Joe looked at Marcus. I'm not either. When Marcus left, he stood on the porch a long time, petting Ranger's head. You keep them close, he said. They're the kind that don't come around twice. Caleb said quietly, We know. Marcus nodded once. Thank you for not letting him be forgotten. Then he walked into the dark, and Joe watched him go. That night, she stood beside Caleb in the hallway, watching Ranger sleep. Neither spoke, but they didn't need to. They both knew they were standing at the edge of something that had come full circle. Something painful, something unfinished, and yet, somehow, something finally healing. The morning after Marcus left, Joe sat alone on the porch, knees pulled up, her coffee cooling in her hands. She hadn't slept much. Not from fear, more from the weight of everything settling in. Some memories don't rush back. They float, quiet, lingering, waiting for stillness. Caleb joined her without a word. They sat that way for a while, just listening to the wind move through the trees. Inside, Ranger shifted once on the hardwood, his tags gently clinking against the water bowl. Then silence again. "He was the last ghost," Joe finally said. "I didn't even realize I was waiting to see him until I did." Caleb didn't look at her. He just nodded. Some people leave without permission. Others leave parts of themselves behind. Joe looked down at her cup. "I didn't realize how much of me was still over there, in the dust, with him. You brought it back." Joe smiled, but it was sad. "Or maybe it followed me home." That afternoon, Ranger walked without the leash for the first time. Just the yard. Just a few slow, steady circles. But it was enough. Caleb stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching every movement like a parent waiting for a child to take their second step. Joe was on the steps, softly encouraging with each pass. "You got it, Echo," she said. "You're stronger than you think." Ranger lifted his head a little at the name, the sound still familiar, still stitched into some part of him no wound had erased. "He's starting to respond to both names," Caleb noted. "He always had two lives," Joe said. "Now they're just finally one." A letter came later that day. This one from the department. Caleb opened it slowly. His stomach sank as he read. Joe looked up. "What is it?" "They're retiring him," Caleb said. "Officially. Ranger's being removed from active service." Joe stood still. "I figured it might happen after the injury," Caleb added. "But I didn't expect it so soon." "They're not wrong," she said. "He can't be what he was." "But he's not done." Joe nodded. "No. He just has a new job." Caleb looked at her. "You?" Joe smiled. "Both of us." That evening, they sat in the living room with Ranger between them. The TV was off. The lights dim. Joe had a small photo album open on her lap, one she had pulled from her bag. She hadn't shown it to Caleb before. "These were taken a few weeks before we lost him," she said, flipping to a picture of her in desert camo, crouched beside a younger, alert Echo. He had the same eyes, same ears, but more stiffness in the body, more tension. He was always on edge, always scanning. Caleb leaned in. "You were too." Joe looked down at the picture. "You don't get to relax in war." But he gave me something like it. A second to breathe, even when the world was screaming. She flipped to another photo. This one was after he found a wounded girl under rubble. She didn't even cry until he licked her cheek. Then she sobbed. For hours. Caleb looked at Ranger. "He still does that," he said. "He waits until it's safe. Then he lets it all out." Joe closed the album. "So do I." That weekend, they drove out to the lake. Joe said it was where she used to go before deployments. A place to clear her head. They didn't talk much during the drive. Ranger sat in the back seat, his head resting between them. The window was cracked just enough to let in the spring air. His ears flicked with every sound, but his eyes stayed calm. At the lake, they laid out a blanket on the grass. Caleb tossed a stick gently. Ranger didn't chase it. He just watched it land. Then, after a minute, he stood, walked to it, picked it up, and carried it back. Slow, proud, tail high. Joe laughed. The sound was warm, real. "Still got it," she said. "He never lost it," Caleb replied. That night, something changed again. Caleb couldn't sleep. He stood in the hallway outside the guest room, unsure if he was about to say something or turn back. Before he could decide, Joe opened the door. She looked at him. No surprise, no question, just waiting. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "You?" She stepped aside and let him in. They sat on the floor, backs against the bed, knees up. Ranger lay nearby, eyes half closed. Joe looked down. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't survived the fire?" "All the time," Caleb said. "But then I remember, I didn't survive it either. Not really. Not until he came back. Joe nodded slowly. We both broke the day we lost him. Caleb looked at her. And now, she met his eyes. Now we're learning how to stay. The next morning, Joe clipped Ranger's leash, took a deep breath, and led him toward the car. Where are you going? Caleb asked. Joe paused. He needs to see the station. One more time. Say goodbye on his own terms. Caleb nodded. Want me to come? Joe hesitated, then smiled. No, you've been his future. Let me walk him through the past. At the station, the officers stood quietly as she walked in. No salute. No words. Just heads nodding, hands lowering. Ranger stood tall, his limp noticeable but no longer defining. One officer stepped forward. The same one who'd delivered the message weeks ago. Is that really him? Joe looked down at the dog. He remembers every inch of this place. The officer looked at Ranger, then at Joe. He saved us all that day. Joe knelt, kissed the top of the dog's head, then stood. And now it's our turn to save him. When she returned home, Caleb was sitting on the porch steps, waiting. Joe opened the door. He did good, she said. Caleb stood. So did you. They walked inside together. Ranger followed, slowly, his steps tired but steady. He lay down between them again, like always, and for the first time in a long time, nobody was looking backward. The last week of spring came quietly. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that feels settled, not hollow. Ranger no longer whimpered in his sleep. His limp was faint now. He still walked slowly, but he walked like he belonged in every step. Joe had unpacked fully. Her boots lined up by the door. Her toothbrush beside Caleb's. Her jacket on the back of the kitchen chair like it always lived there. She hadn't said she was staying. But some things don't need to be said. Caleb noticed that the mail came later now. Ranger didn't jump when the truck passed. He didn't stand guard near the door. He just rested where the sunlight hit the floor and stayed close to whichever one of them was home. Every day was slower now, calmer, and every day, they all healed. In pieces, in silence, in shared coffee, and long walks. One evening, Joe found Caleb out back, hammering 2 nails into a weathered piece of wood. Ranger lay nearby, chewing gently on an old tennis ball. What are you doing? She asked. Caleb smiled. Making a sign. Joe tilted her head. For what? He turned the board around. The word home was painted across it in clean, careful brush strokes. Beneath it, Echo and Ranger, 2009, forever. Joe looked down. Her voice caught a little. You're putting both names. He's earned both, Caleb said. Joe reached out and touched the wood. So have you. That weekend, they hosted a small cookout. Just 2 neighbors and an old friend from Joe's unit passing through town. Marcus didn't come back, but he sent a letter. Inside was a single line. He kept me alive in the dark. You brought him back to the light. They hung it on the fridge. That night, as guests left and the sun dropped below the trees, Joe stood beside Caleb in the yard, watching Ranger sniff the grass one last time before heading inside. He's aging, she said softly. Caleb nodded. We all are. Joe looked up. Do you think he knows this is it? Caleb smiled, then shook his head. I think he knows this is enough. Days passed, then weeks. Joe took a job nearby, not full-time, just a few hours at a local vet. She didn't talk much about the work, but Caleb could tell she liked it. She came home smelling like antiseptic and peanut butter treats. Ranger always wagged his tail when she walked in. Caleb stayed on light duty, answering phones, handling dispatch. No more emergency runs. No more sirens. He didn't miss them. He didn't need them anymore. One night, Joe found an old dog tag under the cushion of her duffel bag. It was bent, faded, the name Echo still visible beneath the scratches. She held it in her palm for a long time, then walked out and gave it to Caleb. He should have it, she said. Caleb strung it onto a soft cord and placed it gently around Ranger's neck. Ranger didn't react. He just blinked up at him like he understood. Maybe he did. The final scene wasn't dramatic. No storms. No final missions. Just a quiet afternoon. Joe sat by the window, book in hand. Caleb made tea. Ranger lay near the couch, his breathing soft and even. The light outside was gold, spilling across the floor like it had nowhere else to be. Joe closed the book and looked at the dog. "He's dozing." Caleb nodded. "Let him." Joe tilted her head. "You think he dreams?" Caleb looked over. "I think he finally dreams of peace." She smiled. Then she whispered, "He earned it." That night, Ranger got up slowly from his spot, walked to the center of the room, and curled up in his favorite place by the rug. Joe was brushing her teeth. Caleb stood at the doorframe. Ranger looked at him once, then closed his eyes. In the morning, the house was silent, still warm, still safe. Ranger had passed in his sleep. No pain, no sound, just stillness. Caleb sat beside him for a long time. Joe knelt beside him, her hand on his fur, the same way she used to when he was afraid. But this time he wasn't afraid. She leaned down, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me." Caleb didn't speak. He couldn't, but his hand never left the dog's back. Later, they buried him under the oak tree in the yard. Joe carved the stone herself. Ranger/Echo, the one who stayed, the one who returned, the one who never gave up. No speeches, just silence, just love, just peace. That night the house felt empty, but not in the way you fear. More like a deep breath after a long cry. Joe sat beside Caleb on the steps. "He was ours," she said. Caleb nodded. "Always." They didn't talk about replacing him. They didn't talk about the silence. Because the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything he left behind. Thank you to my amazing family for staying with me until the end of this story. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this journey, I just know you'll love what comes next. I've prepared something even more exciting and surprising that I can't wait to share with you. Just click on the end card appearing on your screen right now to watch the next one.